Howdy there, Daylight Burners. Happy National Emergency Day 2. Looks like at some point we're headed towards a quarantine on this coronavirus deal. Uh, Starting to get kind of spooky, not gonna lie. Um, I just got done watching the Democratic debate. While it was a shit show, like always, there's a lot of points that I picked up on that I don't particularly like, and as is tradition, there's always stuff I don't like in there, but some of the stuff that I heard was particularly disturbing. So, gonna go over a little bit of that, some of my thoughts, and a couple other events that happened um, over the weekend. So, before I do, got to tell you about my sponsor. Loma Livestock. They're located there in Loma, Colorado. A little sale barn owned and operated by my good buddy George Raftopoulos, and they got a sale going every Wednesday with cows and singles starting at 9 o'clock, followed by the feeders at 11. And if you'd like to consign with them today, you can give them a call 970-858-9988, or you can check them out online at lomalivestock.com. So thanks to George and Loma Livestock for their support, and we'll get into it. So this was the first kind of real debate, I guess if you could call it that, as close to one as you get as far as these presidential debates go. But as the first one where there was just two candidates actually debating back and forth, and not a whole bunch of them up there yelling over the top of each other. They still yelled over the top of each other plenty. Um, and it was one of those situations that no, we got to see how old these freaking guys are. And I don't know if it was more upsetting or depressing or what, but so here you have it. Um, Long story short, you have a choice between Joe Biden, senile old man slipping into dementia, uh, long establishment type candidate or politician, knows Washington well, has made a lot of money from being a politician, even though they're not supposed to make all that much money in the grand scheme of things. But um, he has been embroiled in numerous controversies over stuff that he says. And just here recently, if you remember way back to last year, was the kind of one of the central players involved in a corruption scandal featuring Ukraine. And eventually was, the case used to try and impeach Donald Trump. And but here he is. He actually did pretty decent job of keeping it together tonight, I thought, compared to some of the clips you've seen from him at his rallies and stuff. I mean, he just looks old and out of it. Uh, but he did kind of halfway keep it together tonight. You could see him getting a little agitated, and I thought maybe shit was going to go off the rails, but never really did. And then you got Bernie Sanders, another senile old man, um, but seems to have his wits about him a little bit more. Uh, Problem is with Bernie is he's a dyed-in-the-wool Marxist socialist, and from what I can tell, he's a sure enough true believer in what he is preaching. So whether you call that crazy or not, I think you could make a case for it. But he he's just as scary as Biden, because not because he's not with it anymore, but because he is very much with it, and his ideas are crazy. They've been tried before. They've ended up with millions of people slaughtered. So they're terrible. And that's what you got to choose from on Democratic side. Tulsi Gabbard's still in the race, by the way. They just she never got any traction. Partly because of the media, partly because of the Democratic establishment working against her, and partly because she just didn't do herself any favors. She had some really key moments to kind of set herself apart in some of the earlier debates, and just didn't capitalize on it. She did okay, nothing terrible, but she was a candidate I might have thought about casting a vote for, maybe in a general election, but yeah, between people working against her and her just not helping herself out, even though she's still in the race, she's got no chance. But you'd think, being as progressive and equality minded that the Democrats are, you think they might kind of highlight that she is the only woman left in the race, the only person of color, and but that doesn't get her any brownie points at all. So while she's still there, it's basically Bernie and Biden, and it's looking more and more like Biden's going to run away with it, and probably get enough candidates or delegates to win the nomination on the first ballot of the DNC. So I guess how the Democratic primary, or the selecting the candidate works, you have all your primaries, and then the delegates get assigned to a candidate based on how the state votes, and based on how they distribute those delegates. So some states are winner take all, some are proportional, and anyway, so once you get to the convention, all those delegates will then cast a vote, and on the first ballot, if nobody gets a clear majority, not a plurality, not meaning they say Biden gets 35% of the vote and Bernie gets 32, even though Biden's ahead, he doesn't have a majority. You got to have 50% plus one vote. And if nobody gets that, then the Democratic Party itself, the DNC, can they invoke the rules they have in place, and then they can add candidates to the ballot, and that's kind of where it was looking like it might be headed after Super Tuesday. And Bernie has just kind of fell on his face, and I think he'll stick it out to the end, but it's looking more and more like Biden's just going to run away with it. And that's who the Democrats have. So I shared a meme the other day, and it's got a picture of Jesus. I guess it was today. Got a picture of Jesus smoking a cigarette. And let me see if I can find it real quick. It says God, so it'll be between Trump or Biden, and the angels say yes, crying face. And then God says send the plague, and it shows him smoking a cigarette, taking a big old draw. And that's kind of where we're at right now. So first question of the debate, and probably the first 30, 45 minutes of it, was centered around the current pandemic, coronavirus. And it's only been around in the US for about a month, and I am about damn tired of the damn coronavirus. Like we've had some sickness run through the house here. You're normal. It's flu season, so I've got 2 kids, very, very young. Got a wife who teaches at a public school, and my oldest child, my daughter, goes to preschool. So between the 2 of them, they're exposed to enough illness every year to probably kill a Middle Eastern country. But we've got good healthcare here. We're all in pretty good shape, fairly healthy. And, outside from maybe missing a day of work here or there, whether it be to recover myself or to watch one of the kids or something. Um, that's typically the extent of our um, of our sickness and dealings with the healthcare system. Well, now we've got this coronavirus, which is just another strain of a like your common cold virus. It's also a strain of similar from the same family as SARS and MERS, and it has really uh, taken this country to some pretty drastic measures, and I'm getting a little freaked out by it. I'm still not freaked out by the coronavirus. I've been following the numbers, and so it looks like we've got about 2,000 people infected in the U.S. right now, or confirmed cases, and about 50 of them have died. So we have declared a national state of emergency. Uh, I don't know the number of states so far, but a number of states, and I'm guessing it's probably closer to a majority by now, have declared states of emergency. Uh, we have had the NBA season canceled, NHL season canceled, March Madness is canceled. Um, I read tonight that Vegas they're shutting down a whole bunch of casinos. What's up, Blake? Um, Shutting down a whole bunch of casinos due to this deal. My wife's school district the governor of Nevada just announced tonight that they're taking a 3 week break from school. Not that in itself is a bad thing, but how all this is going about. Washington and California are all proposing, and I think Washington was an executive order by the governor, um, basically shut down bars and restaurants. So bars aren't open, restaurants are takeout only. Um, it is a shit show out there. I went to town on a grocery run on Saturday, and I went to 3 different stores and not a single roll of toilet paper. And normally it wouldn't be a big deal. Um, we we stay pretty well stocked up on stuff, and as I mentioned before, I've got 2 young kids. They take a lot of toilet paper. I've got my wife who takes up more toilet paper than your average man, because women they do. And then I also have 2 young nieces and a sister-in-law around the house quite a bit. So we go through a lot of toilet paper from just the sheer amount of people, and the majority of them being of the female variety. And so when you run out of toilet paper in a circumstance like that, hens get to clucking, and shit gets tense real quick. So you try to stay on top of that. Make sure you always have toilet paper. Me, it's not a big deal. I just when I go to work, that's when I try to take care of the business, and that way I don't have to worry about uh, toilet paper at the house. But for whatever reason, we were running a little low. Had put in an online order at the grocery store. They're out of toilet paper. The lady said they had got a shipment in the night before, and by 6:30 the next morning, the morning that I went to pick up, they had a whole, I don't know if it was a whole truckload or what, but they had a whole shipment of toilet paper gone. And Walmart empty, like not a single scrap of paper was in that aisle. Um, and then I think it was like Grocery Outlet was the other place I went to, and that place had at least some paper towels and some napkins and stuff, but no toilet paper. I noticed that there was a lot of canned food. Like there was no run on canned goods, which you think you might need if you're really expecting to be, you know, quarantine apocalypse type scenario. You want dry goods, canned food, non-perishable stuff. Toilet paper, yeah, it's in the grand scheme of things, it's more of a novelty, but it's nice to have around. So I understand grabbing a package or two. The amount of hoarding that has gone on is insane. As far as food goes, the grocery stores are still pretty well stocked when I went. I've seen some pictures from the cities in the Denver area, and then some of the major urban centers like LA and New York. Their grocery stores are bare. Um, you know, the cattle market talked about it a little bit about it last week, and so I made a pretty pointed effort to start following that a little bit. And man, Friday was like doomsday scenario. I was I was watching Corbett Wall do his feeder flash that he does Monday through Friday, and man, the futures market, everything was down at the limit. Uh, all the sale barn reports he was reading, steers and heifers were all down $8 to $11, and just man, it's ugly, 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 ugly. The stock market has been up and down, and I gotta tell you, I'm starting to lose a little bit of confidence on Trump running away with this election. With if you've been listening for very long, you know that I've pretty well been predicting since last summer when I started this that Trump was going to run away with this election because the Democrats have been so stupid, and they still continue to be very, very stupid. Um, but I said, barring a major downturn or, an act of God, a natural disaster, I think Trump's going to run away with it. Well, now we have two. It looks like the economy is in pretty tough shape right now, and a lot of that is driven by the coronavirus deal. And they just directed the Federal Reserve, to pump like $1.5 trillion into the I think into Wall Street. And man, that is not a good recipe. Like it might alleviate the economy for a little bit right now, but it's just building the bubble up bigger too. For when it pops, it's gonna be ugly, ugly, ugly. So there's not a whole lot of exciting stuff to talk about. I mean, I guess it's exciting, but not in a good way. Not a lot of happy talk out there. So we've got a Trump declared national emergency. We got a travel ban to Europe, UK, and Ireland. Um, and I guess getting back to the debate, well, I said it was a shit show, but there was some important stuff said there, and I don't like where it's headed. So, um, the first question right out the bat was about coronavirus, and whether or not they would consider the possibility of a national quarantine, and they both basically said they would, and that we should. And well, it sounds like a pretty common sense deal. Yeah, well, you just quarantine the whole country and then let it pass, whatever. Um, the idea of the quarantine doesn't bother me so much. You know, Quarantines are kind of a fact of life. Excuse me. So, like I said, quarantines are kind of a fact of life when you're dealing with livestock. Um, we deal with illness quite a bit, and when you have a highly contagious disease, say like scours, for instance, whether that be E. coli, and that's usually a bacterial disease, but it's still very, very, very contagious. So whether it be E. coli or salmonella or listeria, whatever, the case may be, it's going to spread very quickly, and in particularly, it's going to spread quickly because scours. If you don't know, if you're not in the cattle business, that'd be diarrhea. So it's very liquidy shit, spreads real quickly, and on top of that, you're dealing with newborn calves. Uh, when you're dealing with scours. So they don't have the best immune system, and so once one calf has scours, all he has to do, and they shit all the time when they got the scours. So um, it's just it spreads very quickly. Once one gets it, if you don't move them out of the area and quarantine them, chances are it's going to spread to the rest of your calves real quick. Like so, that's kind of the situation we're dealing with here on this coronavirus deal. And so I'm not opposed to the idea of a quarantine. Like I said, that's a pretty common standard procedure. But when you're talking about quarantining an entire country, whether it be for 2 weeks or 2 months, whatever they're going to call for, basically it means all non-essential um, sectors will be confined to their home. So, uh, it'd be like healthcare officials, people in the food supply, and stuff like that would be considered official or necessary workers. So you'll be exempt. So like myself, I'm sure I'd be exempt because I got cows to take care of. Farmers, ranchers, same thing. Healthcare workers, nurses, doctors, and everybody else has to stay home so they don't spread this disease anymore. But then that comes to the fact of like how do you enforce that? Like, is it a loose guideline or is this set in stone? I posed a question yesterday on on social media accounts. It was a poll that said, "Would you support a mandatory quarantine?" And then it said yes. The yes option being the authorities know best, and the no option saying sic semper tyrannis, which thus always to tyrants, basically death to tyrants. It's a quote from Julius Caesar. And as you know, I'm very much on the liberty mindset, and I am very suspicious of the federal government in particular, with good reason. And I caught a little bit of backlash from in the comments, particularly from this one who claimed I was inciting fear and possible acts of violence. At the time, that was a hypothetical. And now this was a subject discussed fairly in depth on national TV between the two major candidates vying for the Democratic nod for president. So I would say my hypothetical is becoming more of a reality. Which, if you follow politics at all and you follow history even a little bit, like you could see this coming. Uh, the one thing the government always wants more of is more of your tax money and more power. Uh, and the language they were using when talking about fighting this coronavirus was really disturbing. So they're declaring war on the coronavirus, a microscopic virus. Um, you can't see. You can see the effects of, but you can't see. Um, you can't eradicate it. It's just not possible. Um, Eventually it'll run its course, and the population will build up the ones that don't perish, they'll build up an immunity to it. But you don't ever get rid of a virus, and the reason I bring that up is because words, they all have meaning. Words matter, and the words they were using was declare war. We were declaring war, and so this. this has a very similar ring to when they declared the global war on terror. They use very vague terms, and they declare war on an enemy that you don't know who they are. You can't see them. Al Qaeda, you could they at least put out some videos and stuff that you could see, at least some of the faces behind it. But when you're declaring war on a virus, and don't think that this is just um, talk tough language. This is how they plan to go forth with policy. And so during times of war, the executive branch is granted an enormous amount of power, and it's just grown over the years as Congress has neglected their duty um, to approve going to war. They've handed off more and more power to the executive branch. Part of that um, just becoming more of a centralized, uh, more powerful centralized government. The march towards that, and also the advent of the atomic bomb, where uh, when we're in the arms race with uh, Russia in the Cold War, there was a very real threat of a nuclear attack, and in order to best, I guess, to have the quickest response to it, the president would make the call whether or not to launch a strike, and and so therefore you're handing one man an enormous amount of power, and over the years Congress just kept just siphoning off some of their power more and more to the executive branch. So in 2001, when we declared war, well, we didn't even declare war. When we invaded Afghanistan, uh, Congress passed the authorization for the use of military force in the global war on terror. And they you had the axis of evil powers, uh, which at the time was Iraq, Iran, and North Korea, and Al Qaeda was the main targets of this AUMF. And but it was left purposely vague and with the option to use military force elsewhere besides Afghanistan and Iraq, and that was used to basically incite the civil war that's still going on in Syria. Uh, it was used to make the strike on Soleimani, or late last year, or I guess it was this year, wasn't it? I can't remember. And anyway, it's basically given the president power to uh, use military force pretty well wherever they see a threat, which is dangerous because we're in like 153 countries right now. But this is some of the same language that Bernie and Biden were using on declaring war on the coronavirus. And the scary part about the coronavirus is that we have an outbreak here. While it's not a very large outbreak by percentage wise of the population, it seems to be spreading pretty quickly. Seems to be like a fairly big deal. I don't buy into all the doom and gloom. The numbers just aren't really supporting it. I mean, 50 deaths, that's terrible. But we're a country of 330 million. Pretty small percentage. So I may have to eat my words later, but I just don't buy into that. But what this does is give the government a huge opportunity to jump in and use people's fear like they did after 9/11 to pass the Patriot Act, which is one of the biggest violations of the Bill of Rights that we've ever seen in this country. But they capitalized on fear and looking towards the authority to pass this through gives the government more power to spy on you. And by using, warfare policies on a disease outbreak, now you're giving the government power over the American people to conduct a war. And while it might be a biological war, um, like I said, this grants the government, and in particular the executive branch, enormous power, like the to suspend habeas corpus or any number of things, quarantines, mandatory quarantines. And this is the stuff that the founding fathers wrote against because it was what was happening back in the day. It wasn't a disease outbreak, but you had a standing army patrolling the streets of the major cities at the time to enforce curfews. And if you don't think a quarantine is going to come with curfews, I think you're pretty naive. So Biden and Bernie both said that they would support a nationwide quarantine. And then they were both asked if they would deploy the military to assist with that. And they both said yes, absolutely. Uh, Biden a little bit more enthusiastically so, but basically, Bernie said they'll use every means necessary, and if and whatever makes sense, and if deploying the National Guard makes sense, then yes, they will. And Biden said we should have done it already, and that is a spooky, spooky deal. Uh, it's just, man, the thought of deploying our own military into our own cities to enforce a quarantine is that's sickening. I don't care who's president. I will not support that. While I think it's probably a good idea to self quarantine and get away from the public, um, the government does not have the right to tell you that you have to stay in your house. And there's been some cases already. The National Guard was deployed up in New York to enforce a quarantine. There's a case in Kentucky where a guy was a confirmed case of coronavirus, was placed under quarantine. Quarantine, and he refused to do so, and now they are forcing him to stay in his house under armed guard. And that's not the America that I grew up reading about. That's not the America that I fell in love with, and that's not the America I want to live in. Um, I think people need to take a little break from uh, buying the toilet paper and take a close look at this very, very obvious power grab that is about to go on. I don't know if maybe I'm just a little too paranoid, which probably is the case, but man, you've seen this stuff happen over and over throughout history, and it always kind of happens the same way. There's some sort of national panic, and people are scared, and they give up their liberty to to the government, so they'll keep them safe. The old classic: give up a little bit of liberty for temporary safety, temporary security. And while you may regain that security without the help of government in the future. You almost never get that little bit of liberty that you give away. You almost never get that back. And while it'd be tempting to support these deals, well, because it makes sense for people to stay home, uh, you can't support a nationwide mandatory quarantine like they were talking about. I mean, that's beyond a bridge too far. That is straight up police state shit. And not that we don't already live in a pretty big police state, but this is like all those people warning about Bernie and his socialism, and they should be. I'm one of them. Um, this is what Bernie's policies lead to, and the fact that we're that close to it. I mean, just that close to it already. Um, should go to show you that we are a lot more of a socialist country than we like to believe, and and not that that's a good thing either. So I don't know, man. there's a lot of crazy shit going on, and if you get caught up in this, and tracking the disease counts, the confirmed cases, and the deaths, and don't pay attention to these relief bills or these executive orders that are going to come down the line. Um, like it's shit's gonna pass by you real quick, and if nothing is said, it's just gonna skate on through. Like I haven't heard it a lot, but I've heard the speculation of, you know, shutting down interstate travel, and that should be that should be a big alarm to a lot of people, especially those who live right near state border, like I do now, like I did growing up. Uh, there's a lot of times where a lot of business is done across state lines. Family live across state lines, and I wouldn't be worried about it at all. Living back home in southeast Colorado, you just catch a dirt road and hop the state line over to Kansas real quick. No big deal. There ain't anybody gonna be out there patrolling. But at the same time, that makes you a lawbreaker, and you get picked up in Kansas. Well, uh, you're breaking quarantine or whatever, and it turns very average, ordinary folks into criminals almost overnight if you don't comply. And man, that's just not what we're supposed to be all about. And that's the whole part of this coronavirus pandemic apocalypse that everybody's talking about. That's the part that scares me the most is the government is they guarantee you, and whether you believe Trump is in on it or not, I don't care. I don't know who all's in it, but there's a very, very concerted effort to almost institute martial law, and that's, man, that's a scary, scary deal. And and if you don't know what that leads to, so I guess to tie into this other story I wanted to cover, there was a young man in Maryland. Maryland is a notoriously strict gun control state. They have a red flag law that's in place, and they use it. I don't know how long it's been in place, but they've used it a lot. People have died from it, and this is just another case of that. So, this young man named Duncan Lemp, Lemp, was he's a from what I understand, I didn't know anything about the guy until I saw his name pop up on my Twitter feed and Instagram. Posted an art. Well, I shared an article about him on all my pages. You can go check that out. I would highly suggest reading it. But the initial reports, I think this happened like Friday night, Saturday, early Saturday morning, something. Um, Kid was 21 years old, software developer or something, and kind of an aspiring entrepreneur. Seemed like a pretty bright kid from what I understand. And he also happened to be a very staunch Second Amendment advocate, was very, very active in rallies, had trained with some local militia groups and had ties to like the Three Percenters and some of these, I guess they would listed by the government as like possible domestic terror organizations, but for the most part, they're just freedom loving folks that really like guns, and they typically have done some reading and they know what unchecked power leads to. So they're holding on to the guns, which is the last line of defense that we have. And so he'd done some training with like the Three Percenters and stuff along those lines. Very active in the gun community, it sounded like. And wasn't very well known. I don't think he only had a couple hundred Twitter followers, and but anyhow, apparently he was red flagged, and a SWAT team showed up at his house at like 4 o'clock in the morning. He lived with his parents, I believe, and busted in. Uh, Ended up killing him and wounding his pregnant girlfriend in the early morning hours. They used flashbangs, and yeah, and they all had automatic weapons. You know, the weapons that all our politicians are um, bound and determined to ban again, I guess, because automatic weapons are already banned for uh, public use, except for those who have a special uh, tax certificate or tax stamp and undergo a very rigorous background check and mandatory inspections of these automatic weapons. So the things that the politicians don't want you to have, the police just use to shoot down a guy. From what I can tell, um, his last run in with the law was a speeding ticket last year or something like that, or maybe it was in 2018, but um, seemed to be of no real danger to the public. Was served with I think they call them like extreme risk protection orders, uh, also known as red flagged. So he was red flagged, and they broke in at 4 o'clock in the morning, used a bunch of flashbang grenades, and shot this guy dead. Um, the police department is staying pretty quiet on this. They haven't released a whole lot of details. They have not identified the officer that shot him. Um, pretty pretty standard stuff from law enforcement, and the family's defense attorneys have released a statement saying that he was asleep while he was shot. Um, I'm not going to take either side on that. I don't know enough. There's not enough info out yet, but as I stated in my post, this is what red flag laws are. This is what is going to happen more and more, and this is why everybody should oppose a red flag law. Uh, they did not release any details on what he was red flagged for, but basically how these deals work is anybody can report you. They say for good cause. You know, if somebody is determined a a public safety risk to themselves or others, then the court grants the police authority to come and confiscate your weapons until you, the accused, have to prove your innocence, basically. The exact opposite of how the justice system is supposed to work, where every defendant is considered innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So this flies right in the face of that. And this kid with, while he may have some ties to these militia groups who, to my knowledge, have never really posed any real threat to the government or the public. I've never read an article where a 3%er was involved in a mass shooting or in a cop shooting or anything of the sort. So why they are considered such a risk, I don't know. Well, I do know, but I don't have any hard evidence to back that up. But it's because they buck the federal government. They go against all these gun control laws that are introduced. They protest against government overreach, and it looks bad for the government. So the government tries to flip it on their head and make them out to be the bad guys. So while he may have had some loose connections or maybe even some tight knit connections with these folks, I've seen no evidence that he was any sort of risk to society. But like I said, they've sealed that red flag warrant for 30 days, I believe. So who knows what will come out of that? I don't expect much, but this is a sad deal. I don't know anything about this kid, but 21-year-old kid shot down in his folks' home, basically because he thought everybody had the right to arm themselves. A sad deal, but that's what these red flag laws are. Anybody can report you for anything, and if a judge sees fit, um, they'll issue a warrant, and next thing you know, you've got a SWAT team kicking in your door. So everybody should be opposed to these red flag laws because while they'll say it's for guns, they'll use it for other things further down the road. That's how it always works with government. You give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And rest in peace, Dylan or Duncan Limp. It's a sad deal. Hopefully, some justice comes out of that. But man, it's a crazy, crazy world right now. I don't know. I don't know how you keep yourself safe from the big bad coronavirus, but I'm gonna keep doing my thing. I think I'm about over this cold, so it might be coronavirus. I don't know. I'm not gonna get tested, so I guess if you guys stocked up, good for you. If not, wouldn't hurt. Um, but stay safe out there. Do the best you can, and don't let the coronavirus get you down. Um, any of my older listeners, I guess, take extra precaution. I guess it's supposedly hit you guys worse than us. So, um, man, I don't know, but don't be signing on for any mandatory quarantines if you know your history at all. You know that's a bad idea. Uh, Oppose that at all costs. And keep an eye out for stuff like that that's going to come out in the next couple weeks. You know, as I'm sure this shit's going to spread a little bit more before it starts to taper off, and who knows what type of shit they're going to propose. And I don't know if it's going to be Trump's idea or not, but there's somebody in his administration is going to try to use this to just take more of your rights and your liberties. So stay on your toes, write your congressman, call into them. They ain't got nothing better to do besides go to bat for you, which you're supposed to do in the first place. So um, let them have it if they try any stupid shit like that. So, um, yep, stay on your toes, stay informed, and don't let the corona get you down. So, go check me out on social media. I'm Matt McKinley on Facebook, at MickerMac85 on Twitter and Instagram. The show page is Burning Daylight on Facebook and YouTube. Make sure you check out the YouTube. I'm going to try to move my streaming over to there. I think Facebook has really been slowing down my outreach here lately, and I've about had it with them. But anyhow, if you do go over there, make sure you click subscribe, and then I'm at Move Your Ass on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. Check out the show page or the website burning-daylight.com, and we'll catch you here on a Wednesday. And you guys have a good one. Be safe, and move your ass. We're burning daylight.